So I actually had to write this down today. So, you know, offloading. So offloading is a huge part of what we do. Think of it as like when somebody works their way to the top. They start a business and they get it off the ground, and 20 years later, they've got a business now. And now they'll have like 100 employees, let's say. They went up from like 3 to 100, and they start offloading their duties, right? That's what allows us to manufacture, have corporations, stuff like that. And then the person that is in charge is supposed to just overlook it all. But then there's, the some people that are basically in early retirement, doing pretty much whatever they want, and offloading even the supervision to people below them. But they're making big money, so good for them. And so offloading affects us in a lot of ways. Like sometimes when we procrastinate, sometimes we're thinking, well, somebody else will do it, or it's not that big of a worry, or I'll get it done in time. Those are all a type of offloading, at the moment. You're not trying to bother with that thought, so you're offloading it, procrastinating, whatever. And a lot of us look at all those people as lazy because we're judgmental. Like, we've always been judged, we've been criticized, we've been ridiculed, and everything else. So when this happens, it programs us to do the same thing to other people, because that's just how our mind sees reality's mechanisms working. And because we're biological and we feel a need to be a part of society in one way or another, whether it's working or even going to the grocery store, you're a part of society, because that's what society does. Is they go to a grocery store. When you're in a drive-through is part of society. When you pay bills, you're a part of society. You pay taxes, you're part of society. And now when people get stressed out, it's because they can't offload that thought, or they don't want to, because they're not a procrastinator or whatever. So then there's the justification. And justification is like, the middle part of offloading. That's when you say, okay, I didn't do this because of this. Now it's a problem, and you're trying to look for a way to offload it. Whether it's just, oh, hey, nobody saw me do it. So you're offloading that. And well, a lot of times it catches up with people. And so what happens when you justify and then manifest getting caught? Well, there was probably a chance you get caught anyway, depending on the situation. But now you manifest, and you're going to show signs on your face and your body. People are going to notice something's off, and they're going to mention this topic, and you're going to get a different look than what you would if you were being asked about something you had absolutely nothing, or knew absolutely nothing about. It might seem fake, it might seem, it's just going to seem different from your normal reactions. So idle games and doom scrolling, they're two types of offloading, because it's not really taking in cognitive thought. Basically, you're just collecting the rewards and doing, minimal work. But hey, we live in a busy society, so that little bit of distraction, it's like that connection to something other than reality, it's a blessing, And so, like, none of this is in order. I didn't even try putting it in order, because I didn't know what I was going to say as I was reading it, because, yeah. So psychosis. Psychosis, when it's a lot, when you offload something big and you're under a ton of stress, and imagine that it's going to have terrible outcomes. This might put you into psychosis, especially if you, what do they call it, ruminate. They ruminate over these thoughts in their imagination, so it becomes, the new simulation program. Now, your simulation, your reality is all based around what the consequences are going to be. So you go into this psychosis, and a lot of times there's not even any consequences. It's just our minds playing tricks on us, and well, we did something really bad, even though we didn't. But in our mind, it just sometimes the wires get crossed, and people care too much, and they get sucked into this reality, and it's hard to get out of. Especially when triggers keep it going. So paranoia and anxiety. So who wants to deal with anxiety? Seriously, why do we drink? That's offloading, because now you're bypassing your micro errors. So so paranoia, when you smoke weed, you get that, this is just a offhand example, but when you smoke weed and you go, in a room full of people and you're all paranoid, what do? You leave the room, right? You're offloading. You're trying to, because that effort that it takes to shrug off other people's opinions, especially when you're under the influence and it's kind of changing your brain, so the simulation can change at any, well, it can with me too, any second, even when I'm sober, my reality is constantly changing. I gotta keep up with the shit, because I forget stuff, and then I'm looking at it from this, and then I'm like, oh, I forgot about this point of view, and so this is especially why I try not to judge, because it gets me in a lot of situations where I'm like, man, I was wrong. So it's like, if you don't judge, you can't be wrong for judging, right? But look at the news. How many people don't judge, about people on the news, and then they hear the, opinion from the other side, and then the person, ends up getting scot-free or goes to jail, and somebody looks like the ass. But that's just one of the things that we're competitive about, right, is being right. So it's just biological. So, imagine if you wanted a perfect wedding, right? So you, let's just say you're an introvert. Like, you're just inviting these people because you wouldn't say you're close to them, but they're the closest you have, right? So you're sending out these invitations, and they get to them, and they come to your wedding, and everything's perfect, right? No need to offload because it's a good moment. Now, let's say those cards get sent out, and they go to people that don't even speak English, but they're like, oh, I see an address, got nothing better to do. So let's just say all these people end up going, right? So what are you going to do? You going to stop the wedding? You going to ask these people to leave? I mean, you're not going to have anybody there if you do. And so it's like, you want to offload that responsibility to somebody else. And if the woman offloads it to the man and the man don't respond, guess what? Have a nice honeymoon. And so the default mode is one of the main reasons that we want to, not one of the main reasons, one of the main reasons a lot of us want to offload is because everything builds up in our default, keeps us overstimulated. So if we offload and we're able to relax, well then, hey, we ain't got a problem, right? Procrastination though. So, and then triggers through pattern recognition. So let's say in the past, right, your body has stored all these times that you had confrontations for whatever reason, but it happened continuously with different people, and you couldn't understand why. You're like, am I really that bad of a person? And it's like, your body is a lot of times in autopilot, reacting to situations, and that's why you end up regretting them afterwards, is because they're triggers that your body has stored, and sometimes we end up dealing with consequences that it's too late to figure that out. Drugs, reality, and ADHD. So drugs are another way to offload reality. It distorts the reality, takes care of the micro errors, so no need to offload, right? We are offloading with the drugs. ADHD, that's another one, when you ask somebody with ADHD that, it doesn't know exactly what you're talking about, you say, go get this, and that person's like, okay. You gave them a couple descriptions, one or two, and it's not enough for them. You know, let's say you say yellow can, you know, and you're, you're looking for a bunch of cans. You know, they're all yellow, or half of them are yellow, or 10 of them are yellow, and it's like you got to search through each one, right? So you're trying to figure out, well, which one would it be? What other description did he use? And what happens is that it almost in that instant, it feels like you're running down a mountain with a gun in your mouth, trying not to blow your head off. Everything gets wacky and weird, and it makes it really hard for people to focus and think rationally. It's similar to psychosis, but it's where a lot of impulsivity comes from, which is what is actually impulsivity. It's a way to offload what you're currently thinking about, right? Or that your body wants to react and you want to get that stress off. That was another one. So let's say you go to work, right, and you screw up, and the first thing you say is, "Oh, I'm sorry, you know, I had this happen today, that happened to me." That's offloading, you know, but you're offloading because you want to prevent that person from, you know, agitating you even more, pushing you further off the plank. So you apologize and you justify it, and that's offloading. So, you know, you do that like 20 times, and then the person finally flips out, and you've been manifesting the whole time this person flipping out, but you've been manifesting to the point where it was taking your focus off what you were actually doing, which is why it happened in the first place. So, introversion. Introverts, I believe, are, you know, the biggest offloaders ever. And that's because, you know, a lot of us are pattern recognizers. So when we aren't able to focus on patterns, we're actually thinking about what's wrong with us. And it's like, you know, we're trying to focus on work, but it keeps going here, there, blah, 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 you know. And so, you know, we ended up screwing up because, you know, we were too busy thinking. So then it's like getting snapped in the face with a giant rubber band. It's like, bam, what just happened? Reality has to, you know, I believe it's that break in that reality when it starts feeling surreal, that when impulsivity, the chances of it increase because your rage is building up, right? So, but yeah, anyway, so a lot of us prefer introversion and offloading. So value, the thing about value, right? And this, you know, when we had, let's say, 1 million people on the planet, they were all valuable. You know, we had this world, we were trying to discover knowledge. Now the problem is, the more people we have, and the technology pretty much getting rid of our value, you know, it's going to be more valuable than us, and it's constantly progressing. So when you have more educated people than there were 100 years ago, 200 years ago, or, you know, so on and so on, it gets, you know, that gets even bigger and bigger. That or no, smaller and smaller, I mean. And so when you have these educated people, they end up making the uneducated less valuable. And now when you have technology, well, yeah, you see where I'm going with that. And conforming. So part of conforming is, and it's not always conforming, it can be because we're introverts, we don't want to bother with anybody, so that we tend to offload. You know, both sides end up offloading. When you listen to somebody and take every directive that they give you, that's a sort of offloading, because you're not thinking for yourself, you're just doing what they tell you. So jokes and narcissism, those are two ways of offloading too, because, like, let's say, you know, you're having a bad day, and, you know, you go home and your partner is, you know, asking you to do something, and you're make a joke of it, you know, and you're like, "Oh, go change the diaper," and you're like, "Oh man, another one," and they're just like, "Oh, I don't want to deal with it," you know. So you're both offloading. And overthinking is another reason we want to stop off, or, you know, offload, is because it's like when I was at work today, I ended up dumping another wheelbarrow. Yeah, you gotta get them arms going, and I feel like them things were made for people 6 feet and over. But man, I tell you, I don't give up though. But so this gravel ends up going where it wasn't supposed to, but it didn't matter. It's just where I wasn't trying to put it. And so, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, overthinking. So I'm on this, sidewalk that's about this big that we made, right? And I had to make this turn, and I'm thinking the wheel's gonna go off, it's gonna slide, it's gonna do something, right? I'm in this tight spot, and I go to dump it, and of course it goes sideways. I'm like, oh man. And it's because when I'm pushing this wheelbarrow, I'm overthinking. I'm going to hit a bump in the ground, I just need to go, go, go. I just need to get it over there as fast, not necessarily as fast as possible. It's a flat sidewalk, but I was thinking that the other day when I was on, gravel and stuff. So the overthinking is a big reason for our offloading, is because in our default, with our default constantly going, thinking is like, man, I don't want to think about that because I want to think about this and I want to think about this, and then it just all collapses, and I'm like, you know what? Let's just offload. Let's think about nothing. Suicide, major way to offload, right? Because you're offloading every problem you could ever have in the future all at once. So we look at it as a justification. It's not always that we want people to not have to deal with us. We love pissing people off. I mean, people love pissing people off. I try not to, because I'll have fun with it. And so I offload in a way that, I try not to make that happen. So suicide, though, when you're feeling hopeless, you're being selfish, yes, sometimes, but it can also be because you're imagining things are, different way than things actually are, because we love to overthink stuff. So suicide is like, well, I mean, just what other way offloads everything at once that you never have to do. You get my drift. And that's like my lanyard today, caught on a freaking cat litter top box, and I'm like, at least it didn't go in a litter, but it dragged with me, and I'm like, I should take this damn thing off. Yeah. See where that got me. I think about it, I still feel like do it. You know what I mean? It's like I think about writing a book, and I'm like, that sounds ridiculous. And not just because of the stuff I would write about. It's because I think just people are, we're in a time where we have this great technology. Why would anybody be writing books? But then it's like, I have to remember that people rely on knowledge that came from other people. You know what I mean? So, in the beginning, we really had no knowledge, not like we do today. We're still figuring out science, we're still figuring out everything, refining, making it better. But we tend to simplify. So when you simplify, what happens? You miss a ridiculous amount. You need a ton of money to even think about, simplifying or anything else. Like, to simplify matter. Imagine the money it costs for that equipment. Look at hospitals. How much does that equipment cost? I don't remember what I was talking about. But anyways, yeah. Video's long enough.